Hello again, and welcome to episode 7 of the Big Dynasty Energy Podcast. I am your host, Tony Walker. You can find me on Twitter at TonyTBDE. Joined today, as always, my good friend, Kevin. You can find him on Twitter at OffsetKevin. And we're switching it up a little bit.
Hi.
We're switching it up a little bit tonight. We were going to talk a little bit of grab bag. We were going to talk a little bit of AFC North and AFC West. Instead, we're gonna do some investigating on Jim Irsay and what else all going on in the AFC South. So we'll be talking Texans, we'll be talking Titans, we'll be talking Colts and Jaguars. So um Kevin, what's going on with Jonathan Taylor and Jim Irsay and this whale that didn't make it on his cross country travels? Like what's going on? Like, is this real life?
God. I Jim Irsay it's like unbelievable that he's an owner. And honestly, I don't know all the details about his foray into trying to save marine life. What was it? He tried to save a whale and it still died or some crap.
$20 million. $20 million, and the whale didn't make it. Got to the new captivity. It was from the East Coast to the West Coast, and I think within a week the whale had passed. So I don't know exactly what's going on with Jim Irsay. He's a hoot to follow on Twitter. The stuff that this guy posts, like, it's real. It's if you need some entertainment on a Tuesday night, just go watch Jim Irsay's Twitter, and you will find some very amusing stuff.
Why pay the best running back in the league when you can waste $20 million trying to kill a whale or save a whale and then it dies?
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, even if
uh,
even if it's not the best running back, I mean, even if you're looking at a top 5 running back, one of the few cowbell running backs that are really left in this league that can do it all, that can run, catch, and pass block. I mean, I guess he's a humanitarian and he loves ocean mammals, so we'll go with that. And so with that said,
yeah,
let's start it. Let's start out in the great state of Indiana. Let's
Indiana.
jump over to Lucas Oil James Stadium and talk about some Colts football. Um, there's really not much to talk about from my end other than Anthony Richardson looks like he could be a Cam Newton, maybe a little, wish version of Cam Newton, who's going to put up, Justin Field like numbers with his legs and right around that 60% accuracy mark for passing. Uh, this is tough. I think there's a ton of value, but not a ton of star power, especially with Jonathan Taylor. For sure missing the first 4 games. With him not being taken off the pup list, he's guaranteed to miss the first 4 games, and it sounds like he's probably going to miss more than that. So, talk to me about value on this team, Kevin. What are you liking in terms of the Jelani Woods, the Michael Pittman Juniors? What do you like on this team? What do you not like on this team? And I think we've verified Jim Irsay is probably the worst NFL owner next to Dan Schneider. So what's your take on Indy?
Yeah, I mean, Irsay, he's already had his drug issues and all that crap, and just being like, eh, you know, all right, so where do we start? I mean, he's basically, you remember like in the NBA when they had the owner of the Clippers everyone wanted to get
I know
rid of. I
it's
mean,
yeah.
Irsay's right there as like that guy, where it's just like, what the hell are you doing? They have a certified star in Jonathan Taylor,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, I mean, I'm not sitting in these meetings with them. Otherwise, I'd be, a much higher paid podcast host than this if I had that level of insight. But here's my gut feel on this: is Taylor sees what's going on with the running back market, and
Mm-hmm.
he's saying, "Hey, I'm going to be up for an extension next year. I want some assurances that if I go bust my ass out there and potentially get hurt, that you're not just going to throw me aside and not give me anything for a contract.
Right.
I want to get paid. I'm the best player on your offense." And instead of offering him any assurances, Jim Irsay just threw gasoline on the fire, tweeted a bunch of nonsense, pissed off his best player, and got it to a point now where Taylor doesn't want to play for this franchise anymore. And the even more infuriating thing about that is, so they're telling him we don't want to pay you. You're not worth us investing in you. But then, hey, look for a trade. But when it comes to trades, oh, you better offer us a king's ransom because he's worth that. He's not worth us paying him, but he is worth us getting a king's ransom back in a trade. Uh, and it sounded like Green Bay and Miami were the two teams that
Yep.
wanted him.
Yep.
And they were both prepared if they traded for him to give him a contract extension that would
Yep.
have made him the highest paid running back.
Mm-hmm.
So they were ready for it. And Indy was Indy's I mean, he's that crappy fantasy team manager in your league where you offer a trade that makes total sense and then the reply is give me Justin Jefferson. like like Miami probably offered a decent package of picks. Maybe they offered A Chain.
Yeah,
Who
I could
knows?
see that.
And the response is, give us Waddle. Like, go F yourself. No.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it sounded like it was something like that of Green Bay. So it's a mess. And Taylor doesn't want to be there. And I have no idea what happens after his 4 week stint on the pup. Now, relating to the rest of this offense, you draft Anthony Richardson, and he's a rookie quarterback. You want to cultivate and surround him with weapons and do everything you can to uh, allow your young quarterback to flourish and be great.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of doing that, they took away his best weapon. So it's not ideal. You want him, he's got all the tools. He could develop into something great, but if they don't give him the right support, he could also just fall flat on his face. And so it's worrisome that they're not up front giving him the support you'd like to see them to give a rookie quarterback. Um, I think he's going to be up and down fantasy relevant, but hopefully he has more ups later in the year. And with his rushing ability, he becomes a top 10 quarterback this year. And then if he develops right, he could be he can be an elite top 3 fantasy quarterback going forward. I don't know which way do you think it's going to go with him? Like good, or do you think he's going to fall flat on his face?
I mean, it's really hard to tell right now when you got guys like Deion Jackson and Zach Moss and another rookie in Evan Hull as your running backs. Good franchises with rookie quarterbacks is they give their rookie quarterback a good running game and not rely on a running quarterback to be the running game. Right. Look at why Chicago didn't win as many games as they probably should have the last couple of years with Justin Fields as a starter. They haven't had a good running back to support him. He's been having to play quarterback and running back. And what I'm scared about for Anthony Richardson is that's going to be the same case for him as they take away an elite talent in Jonathan Taylor. They take away a guy who can touch the ball 22 to 26 times a game. And those hits add up. I mean, even though you're 6'4", almost 250 pounds, NFL hits are different than college, and Anthony Richardson is going to be hit differently than he was when he was playing at Florida, especially in the AFC. I mean, AFC South. You got some good defenses. Jacksonville has a decent defense. Houston, they have an up and coming defense. They've gone defense heavy the last couple of years. Like this division is kind of what I saw the NFC East. The last 5-6 years of being a competitive but not great division. He's gonna have to fight and get some ugly wins, and it makes it that much harder when you don't have a guy that you should easily have in the building in Jonathan Taylor. So right now, I would still go with Anthony Richardson. I would draft him, and I would take him relatively high. Like, if I want to buy in, which I think he could be, a Justin Fields level type quarterback, I would take him in the first round of a rookie draft. He would be a guy
Yeah.
that I would target towards the back end of a startup. He wouldn't be my starter right away, that's for sure. But if you're
So I
talking,
mean, I was gonna say for reference, in our league, I took him at the last pick of the first round in the
Mhm.
rookie draft.
Yep, yeah, and I mean he's a guy that if you do, especially if you're like a super flex or a 2 quarterback league, this is the type of guy you want to pair with a passing quarterback where you can get those heavy passing stats with your QB1 and then try and pad it, with an ugly, throwing week from a guy like Kirk Cousins or hell, even Aaron Rodgers or Joe Burrow, some of the higher end guys. You throw you mix in a running quarterback like Anthony Richardson with those guys, you have more of a balanced team. Right now, I think Anthony Richardson, if you really follow football, his value is probably an all time high because this not only the offense but this franchise is just a fucking disaster. I mean, it's it's
Yeah.
it's it's a train wreck. I If I got
Yeah.
if I got drafted by Indy, if I was playing, and if I got drafted by Indy in the next 3 years, I would probably hold out. I would not want to go there. They are the new Houston Texans, I think.
Yeah, I mean, just so when we're talking about Richardson, because that's like with Taylor being completely ostracized, Richardson's the only real thing we can really talk about. You want to talk about other things? I'm not into anyone else in the backfield in Indy.
Mm-mm.
Um, Last year, I liked the prospects of Michael Pittman with 90-year-old Matt Ryan throwing to him because I
Hmm.
for some reason I thought Matt Ryan could still do things, but not. But Richardson, for as good as excited as we are about his legs, his accuracy, he had accuracy issues in college, and it wasn't great in the preseason. Like the game, everyone was like, "Oh boy, look at him in Philly." I think he had below 50% accuracy in that game. So I don't think there's a lot of track record or data to suggest that Pittman's going to have a breakout year. I think it might be a struggle for Pittman and the other receivers. And then Jelani Woods he was one of my sleeper picks, and I ended up ditching him because I wanted to instead focus on Dulcich. But so I still thought Woods is a breakout candidate, but
Hmm.
he's been hurt all preseason with some mystery ailment, I
Yep.
believe. I think did he start the season on the pup or the IR?
I think I know when camp started, he was limited early on, so I don't know the full story, but I know that Mo Alley Cox and Kylan Granson, they have been taking the reps with the ones most of camp. So when Jelani Woods is back and he is healthy, he's probably the guy that I'm willing to take a shot on just because his value is going to be next to nothing. He's a waiver wire guy that you can get in any league. He's 6'7". He's an offensive tackle that can catch the ball.
Yeah.
That's a guy that I'll hold a roster spot for, especially in leagues that have a deeper bench. This team, though, in terms of wide receiver, this is kind of the frustration like you see in Seattle's running back room is they got three decent guys, right? Michael Pittman Jr., I think he could be a stud on almost any other team in a competent organization. Alec Pierce, I like him. He's another big body guy. He's 6'3". Second year guy to Cincinnati, just a kind of a scrappy guy. He kind of reminds me of Wes Welker, the way that he runs. Obviously he's bigger than Wes Welker at 6'3", 211 pounds. He's just a scrappy dude that he can take a hit across the middle. He's not afraid to, run those in routes and those dig routes. So he's a possession guy that I like. He's not going to be the 50-yard bomb guy down the field. He's going to be a possession receiver. And Isaiah McKenzie, former Denver Buffalo Bill receiver who was a speedster, seventh year guy to Georgia. He's a guy that I'm not going to roster right away, but he's a guy that I'm going to definitely keep an eye on because Anthony Richardson does have a cannon for an arm. And if there's going to be one guy that's going deep down the field, it's going to be McKenzie. Again, not a guy that I'd be rostering right now, but just someone to keep an eye on. Other than that, this team to me is poo poo on a stick. It's terrible. I'm not a fan. I don't want any part of the Colts other than Anthony Richardson. And to be honest, I wouldn't even want to be a part of the Jonathan Taylor sweepstakes, even if he does report back and if he's back starting week 5, because who knows if he's gonna, line up in the backfield and really be giving it 100%. Why would he want to?
Yeah. He doesn't want to put his health at risk
Mm-hmm.
playing for Ursay. He doesn't. I think he had his heart to heart with Ursay, and it was like, all right, let's talk mano a mano. Let's like try to come to an agreement. And he walked away going, holy shit, Jim Ursay is as big of a train wreck as he is on Twitter. I'm not gonna trust my future in this guy's hands.
Yeah. Jim Irsay is Daniel Snyder, the former Washington Commanders owner, is looking back and is probably telling the rest of the league, "Yeah, I wasn't that bad, now was I?" I mean, he was. He was absolutely terrible, but not as psychotic, I don't think, and as animated as Jim Irsay.
Yeah.
Well, cool. I think that wraps it up in the great state of Indiana. Let's head down to Houston. This is actually a team that is young. I think there's some excitement around this team. I don't think they're going to be an NFL relevant team for a couple more years. Their defense is getting better. They've gone defense heavy the last couple of years. Guys like Derek Stinley, second year cornerback out of LSU, guy that I was hoping the Vikings would go up and get. Instead, we got, I think, Lewis Cine that year in the draft. But on offense, they got CJ Stroud, young quarterback who I actually like more than Bryce Young. Him and Anthony Richardson are neck and neck for me. I think CJ Stroud is more of a balanced quarterback, but I think he can still run the ball when he needs to, but he's a far better passer than Anthony Richardson. Um,
Definitely.
I
Yeah.
I don't know if I like this receiver room enough to be like, oh yeah, this is going to be a team that can definitely, um, do some damage. I mean, their wide receiver one right now is Nico Collins, who's showed flashes last year that he could be good. You got the ghost of Robert Woods, who last year in Tennessee did nothing. An interesting signing, former Dallas Cowboy Noah Brown, who had a couple of interesting games last year with the Cowboys. If you don't recall, he had a week 2 against Cincinnati. I think that was the game. I forgot if it was Michael Gallup went down right away or if it was CeeDee Lamb, but he ended up going, 5 targets, 5 receptions, 100 yards, and a touchdown. And he had a couple of similar weeks like that towards the end of the season. This is a
You're,
not star-studded receiver room.
you're forgetting one other Dallas signing in the
Oh,
tight end room.
Dalton Schultz. Dalton Schultz. Yeah, that's right. Who I think could be CJ Stroud's security blanket. And, you know, it, Dalton Schultz, I did trade him away in our house league just because I got Mark Andrews and I was able to get Michael Meyer, rookie tight end out of Vegas. But, Dalton Schultz, he's not your typical blocking tight end. He's not 6'7". He's, a whopping 6'5", 244, which by NFL standards isn't that big for a tight end. He's a pass catching tight end, and I think he's going to average, 6 targets a game, 5, 6 targets a game. I mean, if he can go 4 for 45, 4 for 50, and half a touchdown, you're looking at 12 to 16 points a week from this guy, who I think is steady to be a top 12 right at the back end of the tight end ones again. Because that's what he was for Dak Prescott in Dallas, and I think that the reason why Houston brought him in is because they want to have that pairing with a rookie quarterback. So, what do you? I mean, and Damian Pierce. I mean, that's a pretty easy one. I like Damian Pierce. I like Devin Singletary too. I think Devin Singletary offers a lot of value in terms of what you have to pay for him, which is essentially nothing. You can probably get him on waivers. I saw you dropped him in our house league today for
Yeah,
um, Van
Van
Jefferson,
Jefferson.
which we'll talk about that, later on in the show. But I mean, I think this is a team where there isn't a lot of proven guys who have a lot of star power, but there's a lot of potential value. Where if you have a roster spot for Nico Collins, if you can, draft a second quarterback in CJ Stroud, like you can potentially have some long term value in dynasty format. So, what are your thoughts on Houston?
Yeah, they're interesting. They're a team that you know, Bill O'Brien on his way out kind of fleeced them, and they were just kind of one of they were the team. There was a lot of teams in this AFC South where the AFC South was kind of the crap division that no one really cared about for a
Mm-hmm.
while. Just there was nothing exciting there, and they're turning it around. I think Indy we talked about, but everyone else, everyone seems to be on an upswing where I think there's going to be actually some excitement coming out of the AFC South, and Houston's one of those kind of forgotten teams that they're they had Lovey Smith as their coach. It's hard to get excited about that. They brought in a new coach, and they went all in this year, which was odd for a team that's in a full rebuild.
Mm-hmm.
Like they traded next year's number one. They traded next year's first round pick so that they could have the top 2 picks in this year's draft. So they took or sorry, picks 2 and 3 in
You
this
have two
year's
and three.
draft. So they got CJ Stroud, and then they got Will Anderson, the number
Mm-hmm.
one defensive player in the draft. So that's kind of an all-in move, which is odd for a team that's not on the cusp of contending for a championship to give away next year's first round pick. It tells me that a team that everyone was accusing of tanking in the last few years is definitely in it to win games this year. They're making a push to hopefully make the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
You don't give away next year's first round pick if you're gonna have a crap team again next year.
Exactly.
So, when it comes to Damian Pierce, I'm very in on Damian Pierce. He was a bright spot on a team that was otherwise kind of like the JV team. He gave that offense a spark. He was an explosive running back. He had a period of weeks where he was within the top 20 running backs. on a team where there wasn't a lot else going for them on offense. And then he got banged up and he faded. But I still think a healthy Damian Pierce on a more balanced offense where you actually have a quarterback that can throw and receivers that can catch, where they're not all keyed in on stopping Pierce. I think the best is still yet to come from Damian Pierce, and I think he can actually catch the ball a little bit more too if he has a quarterback capable of throwing him the ball.
Oh, for sure.
Um, so I think I'm in on Damian Pierce. I have him kind of like right around my running back, like 16 or 15 this year. I think he's going to have a good year. I'm rookie quarterback. CJ Stroud, I'm hoping he has a good year, but I think it's going to be a learning curve of him. And I think the receiver room's a little bit better than people think. There's a lot of unknowns there, but I think
Hmm.
Nico Collins, for some reason, I thought he was older than he was. This is only his third season.
Yeah.
So I think he's due for a breakout year. He's a big guy. He's a big red zone target guy. Last year, he was the wide receiver too, sort of, when Brandon Cooks was there. And then Cooks was like, get me out of here. Um, but he's going to be the unquestioned number one. I think he's due for a breakout year. And I was hoping that the other guy that would break out would be John Mechie, coming off his leukemia battle. He's on the team, but I think he's more of a feel good story than a fantasy star. But their rookie receiver was turning heads in preseason and,
Tank
and in
Dell.
camp.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tank Dell. I think he's gonna come on this year, and so I think you're gonna have a solid two receivers there, Nico Collins and Tank Dell. Nico Collins probably the only fantasy relevant guy at least till later in the year, and then Schultz will be. I have him about like tight end 15.
Yeah.
Whatever. He's not going to be a superstar, but he will be a security blanket. And just yeah, the moves that they made in the offseason are not the moves of a team that's just going to continue the tank and build for draft picks. I think they're going to be noticeably improved this year because they are actually in it trying to build a winner right now.
For sure. Well, and what's funny when you had mentioned earlier on, what they gave up to, obviously they were going to take CJ Stroud at second overall, right? They needed a
Mhm.
quarterback. Would you value CJ Stroud more this year trying to rebuild with a rookie head coach and D'Amico Ryans? Why wouldn't you wait till next year? I mean, and this is where I think you're right, where they're trying to win. They had faith in CJ Stroud to turn this franchise around. But you got Caleb Williams coming in next season from the kid from USC who is, I don't know if you saw the highlights from this weekend, but he's making Patrick Mahomes plays. I mean, I know it was against Arkansas State or something, or I don't know who it was against, but it was
Yeah.
not a good team. Um,
Yeah, I watched him weaving in and out
oh
of
my god,
defenders and firing it in. Yeah, he
jumping out of
he
bounds
looks
and throwing it 40
dynamic.
yards down the field. I mean, so I think this team, they're all in on CJ Stroud, obviously with the moves that they made to trade up to get a defender, which when you look at this defense, they got Jimmy Ward, who's a veteran safety. um I'd mentioned the Derek Stingley at the right cornerback position, Sheldon Rankins and Kurt Hinish. Those are their two right defensive tackles, which those are they have a good mix of veteran guys and young guys, which this team could be fun in a couple of years. I think they're still going to have some struggles the next year or two, and they're going to be a frustrating team fantasy wise. But you're also going to get some random games where CJ Stroud puts up 350 yards and 5 touchdowns because they're down 35-0 in the second quarter and they're just chasing points. So um,
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is, going into the draft, it was another one of these deals where whenever you look at an NFL draft, there's always who's the best player and then who's the best quarterback. And
mhm,
and the quarterbacks always go first because every franchise needs a franchise quarterback. But the best player in the draft, everyone was saying, was probably Will
Will
Anderson
Anderson,
as a dynamic defensive end. There was also the Georgia defensive tackle that fell because of
Jalen
his
Carter. Yep.
his off the field concerns. He was being in the talk as the number one overall. And then I don't know, maybe even Bijan Robinson, but like running back, so we gotta shade him. But yeah, so I mean Will Anderson was considered the best overall prospect in the draft at DN, which is probably one of the most valuable outside of quarterback spots you can get. So yeah, it's an all-in move. I think yes, it'd be nice to tank again and get like a dynamic Patrick Mahomes quarterback. But with Houston, I think they've been irrelevant for so long. It's like, are you really going to make the fan base wait another year of like not even trying out there? Like it was, I think it was time for them to try to make a move and establish themselves as an interesting franchise trying to win games again.
For sure. And I think there's definitely a culture shift. They bring in D'Amico Ryans as the new head coach, who was a outstanding defensive coordinator in San Francisco the last couple of years, and he was an outstanding player when he played with the Texans. So I think just kind of watching the storylines and watching the training camp interviews and whatnot with D'Amico, it's cool to see this team being revitalized because being an expansion team, being in a city that's never been big into football, it's always been Dallas down there. If you go way back, to the Houston Oiler days, they're it's time for them to be a contender again. The JJ Watt, glory days. When Houston, was making the playoffs, when it was D Hop and those kind of guys. So I'm excited for this team. I think they'll be fun to watch. But I will say, you're on the side of caution. The next couple of years, I think at least the next 1 to 2 years, this will be a fantasy frustrating team.
Yeah.
So awesome. Well, before we head on up to the Music City, want to make sure to let you guys know we are now on Instagram, we are on TikTok, we are on Spotify, Apple Music. We are all over the place. We're trying to make sure that anyone and everyone can listen to our amazing content, Dynasty Redraft, whatever it is. We are probably talking about it here on the show. Make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram and ask us some questions. That's something that we haven't really done. We're interactive guys. We like to not just talk here about football, but we like to in this day and age, utilize technology in any way that we can. So ask us questions on all social media platforms, and we will definitely get back to you on any fantasy questions you guys have. So
Yeah.
um,
Ask us anything. We would love to guide you.
especially Jim Irsay questions. I think if we can get some good Jim Irsay questions, maybe we'll talk giveaway or something. Maybe a Jim Irsay T-shirt or something. I think there was a pretty good picture of Jim Irsay on our trailer for our teaser for the last episode. So, oh, Jim Irsay. All right, so moving on up to Music City, Tennessee, Nashville, Titans territory. This is one of those teams that there's a lot, but not a lot. You got Derrick
A lot of
Henry,
names.
a lot of names. I mean, if you're talking fantasy relevancy, specifically in Dynasty, this is kind of where at least receivers go to die, essentially, when it comes to fantasy value. We saw it last year with Julio Jones. Do we see it again this year with DeAndre Hopkins? I don't know. You got Traylon Burks, who I thought was an underwhelming receiver last year. I think he has potential to be a good receiver. I know he missed, 6 games last year. But the 11 games he did play, 33 receptions, 440 yards. He did average, almost 13 and a half yards per catch, but only 1 touchdown. I don't know.
Yeah.
From a receiving standpoint, I mean, obviously D Hop, he is 31 years old. He's by far the best receiver on this team. But how does he translate from a Arizona and Houston team that was playing with more dynamic quarterbacks or teams that were constantly playing from behind and chasing points, so he was stat padding a lot that way, to a team that relies on Derrick Henry? So does DeAndre Hopkins still hold value in your opinion? Is he still a guy that you would go after if the trade value was right or if the draft value was right? What are your thoughts on D Hop specifically, and then we can get into the quarterback and running back rooms next.
I mean, you remember the ad campaign and movie with Kyrie Irving, Uncle Drew?
Yep.
This just feels like the Uncle Drew League team here. Like old man, they still got old man game. Eh, so none of them have fallen off yet.
Yet.
But you got Derrick Henry and you got DeAndre Hopkins, and you can even put Ryan Tannehill here in this list.
Mm-hmm.
They're that carton of milk with the expiration date that was this morning. But you could probably drink it and it probably doesn't smell like rotten eggs yet. You could probably still put it in your cereal. But do you trust it? Um, I I'm worried about Derrick Henry. Um, I know he's King Henry, but when I did my loves before and I talked about Nick Chubb, Nick Chubb, part of it was he's getting up there in age, but he hasn't had that many huge number of carry seasons. Derrick Henry has carried the rock a lot in the pros, in college. He has a lot of carries. And I know that he's a physical specimen, but at some point they do finally go. So I'm worried that at some point his effectiveness will dip down just like Adrian Peterson,
Hmm.
who was also a physical specimen. DeAndre Hopkins, I was having an argument with one of my buddies about this, saying, "Oh, I'm worried about him." Oh, why? He's DeAndre Hopkins. It's like, well, remember Julio Jones when he went there and he just immediately got old? And it's like, yeah, but this is DeAndre Hopkins. It's like, yeah, Julio Jones was elite the year before he went to Tennessee. So I'm just worried. It's hard to hate on these guys too much because they have been elite guys and they can absolutely still be elite guys. But on my rankings, I definitely have their age factored in. Um, they're guys I don't want in Dynasty, but I would maybe take in redraft. Um, DeAndre Hopkins, I'm fading him down into like the mid 20s as like a okay flex guy. Um, he's also gotten banged up recently too, and I feel like the injury concerns don't go away as you get older.
Hmm.
Um, so I don't know. I'm completely out on Tannehill. There's like no reason I would ever have him on my team. I'm lower on Henry than most, so that means I don't end up with Henry. I'm out on Hopkins. I'm a bad fantasy football analyst because I don't even know what tight ends play in Tennessee anymore, but none of them are on any of my lists.
Yeah,
Um,
I can't. I can never pronounce his first name, but it's Okonkwo, the second year tight end out of Maryland.
yes.
Little undersized, 6'3", 238 pounds. Definitely a receiving guy. There has been some hype around this guy. I wanted to touch on him. I'll let you go ahead and finish your thought there, but I'll jump around between Okonkwo and Henry once you wrap your side up.
Well, yeah, so I mean I have seen people high on him. I'm not high on him. Maybe I'll miss out on his breakout, but Tennessee feels like a team. So they might win the division because they, uh, I'm forgetting the name of their coach, the New England guy, Vrabel.
Yep.
He seems to always have these guys ready to play. They're always a tough out. So they're a well-coached team. They have kind of the Patriot way system, but they feel like a team right on the verge of a transition. And it's either going to happen mid-season this year and they're going to tank, or it'll happen after the season. But it feels like eventually Henry's going to fade and Spears will be in.
Hmm.
Eventually Hopkins will be out, and they'll be going more to Traylon Burks, who I I thought he was actually I was very high on him last year, and he had about as bad a year as he could have hoped for. Like part of the problem was they traded AJ Brown, and the pick they got from that they drafted him, so everyone just assumed he was going to step in and be the next AJ Brown.
Hmm.
That was too much pressure for him. He's been banged up. I think he's banged up again this offseason. So it's just I don't know. It's tough. It's tough to get a good feel on where he's at. But at some point, it feels like the Tannehill era is going to be over, and they're going to turn the keys over to, I presume, Levis, unless the other QB they drafted last
Malik
year,
Willis.
yeah, unless Willis can actually prove that he's an NFL quarterback, but so far it seems like that's not likely. So it just feels like they're a team that's either gonna show they still have it this year, or they're gonna pull the plug and start the rebuild, and that could happen at any point.
Yeah, I mean, I differ from you a little bit. I think this team compared to last year did get better. They got older, right? I mean, they substituted an aging Julio Jones for an aging DeAndre Hopkins. You're right. Derrick Henry, the last 4 years, he saw 300 carries except one time, and that was back in 2021, where
When he got hurt, right?
he played 8 games and he still had 219 carries. He was on pace for over 400 carries that year.
Yeah.
Um, so you know, am I worried that the tread on the tires on Derrick Henry is starting to get low? Absolutely. Um, But for what Derrick Henry's value is, and I said this in an earlier episode, is if even if Derrick Henry falls out of the top five, which I think this year is probably his last year in the top five, but I don't see him being any worse than RB4, RB5 in any format. Um, Looking at this in a 2-year window, if you have Derrick Henry next year in Dynasty, he'll be 30 going on 31. And if you're having a 30, 31-year-old still being a back end RB1, high end RB2 in a flex spot, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I would rather take an aging Derrick Henry, knowing that his production is going to go down probably 20% over risking over, a potential of a, Tank Bigsby or, who are some other younger guys coming into the league, Zach Charbonnet. I would rather have that guy. I would rather have Derrick Henry because
DeAndre Miller.
yeah, you know what you're going to get in an offense that's going to want to give him the ball. So I agree that the production, you're not going to get Derrick Henry of, 2020 when he was the third overall running back in PPR formats. Like, you're not going to get that ever again. But if you can still get back end RB1, high end RB2 numbers, like, I'll take that any day of the week because I know what I'm going to get out of Derrick Henry, and that's going to be a lot of touchdowns. He's going to average over, 4 yards a carry. And if he's getting 20 carries a game at 4 yards a carry plus goal line rushes, I mean, the guy's going to be good for 15 plus fantasy points at least the next 2 years. So I'm still high on Henry, not as high as I was maybe 2 or 3 years ago. Treylon Burks, yeah,
I was gonna say you still value Henry, whereas I'm ready to take away his car keys, sell his house, and put him in the old folks' home right now.
yeah. I mean, and I think we look at running backs very similar from a draft perspective, and value of how running backs are still extremely valuable compared to receivers, especially pass catching running backs. I think we look at aging running backs a little differently, where if I can eke out value for a year or two in an aging running back, I'll take that over a rookie if I'm contending. Now, if I'm rebuilding in Dynasty, I'm trading Derrick Henry 2 years ago. Like, if I know that my team's not going to be good, I'm trading him away for picks and I'm trading him away for younger players. But where my team is still what I believe is a contender, especially in our house league, I'm going to ride Henry until the motor just gives out and transmission goes out. I'm riding him to the end. So Okonkwo, I like him a lot actually. I think he could be a high back end or tight end one, high end tight end two at the worst. I have him in the Dalton Schultz range. But who knows? I didn't get him in our house league. I missed out on him in my work league. Didn't have enough money to get him at the end of the draft. Someone was able to get him for $2 when I was down on my dollar picks. I think this guy could be a 70 reception, 700 yard, 4 touchdown, 5 touchdown tight end. Not anything special guy you're going to plug in when there's injuries in a bye week. But when you look at, what's going to happen in a year or two, I think with that him being a younger tight end, I think that he's going to have an opportunity to be a part of that rebuild, and he's going to be able to be, potentially Will Levis or Malik Willis's security blanket. Because again, young quarterbacks, they love two things: a good running game and a good tight end. And if he can be a guy that can grow in this offense, I think that he's going to be a guy that's going to have value in this offense going forward. And Tyjae Spears, I made sure to grab him. I traded back up into our draft. Or no, actually, I got him. Someone dropped him, I think.
I think you got him on waivers.
I got him on waivers. Tyjae Spears, I mean, he's a handcuff. Kind of like, I would compare Tyjae Spears to Alexander Madison back when Dalvin Cook was in Minnesota. You want to have this guy. Derrick Henry is maybe not the most injury prone guy, but he's definitely getting up there in age. And this preseason, he has looked good. I mean, he's been explosive. He's catching the ball. He's a great pass blocker. Went to a small school in Tulane, but at 5'10, 200 pounds, like, this guy's a bowling ball. Like, he's not Derrick Henry size, but he's still a bigger back. So again, if Tyjae Spears is a part of the rebuild, and if Derrick Henry gets either released or if he gets traded for a 4th-round pick or something to a team that's desperate for a running back next season, I mean, hey, Tyjae Spears, I think, could easily step into the Derrick Henry role, get the ball 20 times a game, both in the air and in the backfield, and be productive. So I'm not in on this team as much as I am on the next team we're going to talk about, just because, yeah, it's definitely the old folks' home of the AFC South.
Uncle Drew.
But I think there is some value that you can find on this team. So, well, with that said, we're gonna wrap it up with our last team, and that's the reign of second year head coach Doug Peterson and the Jacksonville Jaguars. There's a lot I like about this team. I would bet a lot of money that Calvin Ridley is going to end up being a top end receiver again. I think that even though he's an older receiver for a guy that hasn't been in the league that long, um, I saw a clip where Zay Jones ran a route, and then right after him, you know what I'm talking about, and then Calvin Ridley
Yeah,
ran the exact same route, and it looked like it was in fast forward. I mean, the guy looks incredible. I mean, the guy definitely learn how to play daily fantasy sports with a burner account and get faster all at the same time. So I like this team. I think Trevor Lawrence is I wouldn't say Patrick Mahomes level. I think he's more on the Lamar Jackson, Justin Herbert level in terms of fantasy production. He's a guy that I'd be going after if he became available in trade. But the guy that I'm really interested in this year is Tank Bigsby. I really like this guy. I think that by week 7, 8, the split with him and Travis Etienne, who has shown that he is injury prone and he is a smaller back. Tank Bigsby has looked good, man, and he looks good with that number 4 and those clean white Jacksonville jerseys. He just looks like a running back that can get the ball 15, 18 times and be a top 15, 20 guy. He's just got prototypical size. He looked like Leonard Fournette back when he played with Jacksonville. So I like him a lot. Um, and I like Christian Kirk too. I think, he had a really good year last year. I think he was a top 15 receiver for a while. He was actually wide receiver 1 in PPR formats. I want to say through week 4 or 5, he was one of the, top 3 guys. And um, yeah, I think that there's a lot of talent on this team, a lot of value. I think they're, kind of similar frustrations to the more dog shit teams. This team has a lot of young talent, and I think that it's going to be frustrating in the sense that there's a lot of guys that can pop off at any time, including tight end Evan Ingram, who I think is an under the radar guy that you can get as a steal in your draft. What are your thoughts, man? That like I said, there's a lot to go that's going on here. There's a lot of storylines, especially in the backfield. What are you liking in Jacksonville? What are you not liking in Jacksonville?
yeah, I have them circled as one of my teams I think can completely break out this year. Um, I mean, Trevor Lawrence, when he was drafted, people are talking about him as upside of John Elway. Um, and last year, I was wondering for a little bit early in the year, like he was kind of struggling a little bit, and it's like, is he ever going to be that franchise guy? And then he kind of came on, and he looked it in the playoffs. I think Trevor Lawrence is going to break out this year and be one of those guys that makes the leap into elite quarterback territory. He can run, he can throw, he's got all the tools, and he's got some good weapons. Like Kirk, I feel like he's still being overlooked a little bit, but he had an
Hmm.
amazing year. But I think he's going to be the wide receiver too. I honestly, I thought so. I mean, the year Calvin Ridley had it all fall apart in Atlanta, I had him as my wide receiver 4 overall. I drafted him in a league. I was all in on Ridley, and then he had just a horrible year. Had to take a leave of absence for the team. Had the gambling thing come up, and I said I think he's done. And so far, all the reports is I was wrong. He still got it. He looks the part. The reports were that the coaches had to actually kind of hold him back and slow him down. Like he wanted to go so hard right away that they said, "Whoa, slow down, take it easy. It's still training camp." Like he seems like a guy that's highly motivated to prove that he still has it and that he's still an elite receiver in this league. So
Hmm.
if he comes back and he's anywhere close to what he was of Atlanta at his peak, I mean, this is a guy, it's hard to call him a sleeper because the word is out. Everyone's already on top of him,
Yeah.
drafting him really high. So he's not a sleeper. But I think he definitely can be a top 15 wide receiver. Kirk is good. So Lawrence has weapons, and Ingram, the ability was always there. He was just frustrating in New York, and I think as part of it was just the offense in New York just was
Not
just
good.
sucked.
Yeah, not good.
Yeah. So he kind of got reborn last year, and I don't think Ingram's going to be a top 5 tight end or anything like that. But I think if you end up drafting Ingram in your draft, I think it's a safe bet he's a top 10 tight end. He will be a tight end 1 this year.
Hmm.
Just I think he's a safe bet to be kind of like the tight end, like 7 or 8 around there. Um, So yeah, I think there's a lot of weapons there. I think they had a mini breakout. Oh, and I didn't even touched on the running backs. I'm more in on ETN than you are, I think. I think last year they kind of pumped the brakes on him a little bit. I mean, at the beginning of the year, he was still in a timeshare with Robinson.
James Robinson. Yep.
And then they traded him away and they said we're all in on ETN. And I think they were still a little worried because he's coming off that foot injury. So like there was a game where they held him out because he had some soreness. I think those concerns are in his past and he's explosive. He's actually more physical than people give him credit for. I think he's going to have a breakout year, a lot more yards, more usage in the passing game. I also drafted Tank Bigsby as the handcuff for him. I feel like he's probably one of the most important handcuffs out there because he has shown the ability to be good. And honestly, Jacksonville might be a team that uses two running backs for them. Maybe they'll both even have value. Um, so yeah, I'm high on Bigsby. If anything does happen to ETN, I think Bigsby becomes a top 10 play in
Hmm.
fantasy. So he's definitely a handcuff, one of the ones that you want to get. But I also think ETN is going to have a lot more yards this year. He's just so explosive that I think he's going to have some big plays. Maybe a little bit more limited on touchdown goal line work because of Bigsby, but I still think the value's there. I think I nabbed ETN in my redraft league in round 3, and I was pretty happy with that. Um, yeah, there's a lot to like here. We talked about how Tennessee has kind of been historically a good team in this division with their old man game. I think this is the year that Jacksonville breaks out and takes this division by storm, and they're going to be the winner. And there's going to be a lot to like here. The opposite of the frustrating fantasy team. I think you're going to have a lot of value in Jacksonville.
For sure. Yeah, I think when I mentioned earlier the frustration of this team, it's not going to be that there's a lack of production. I think there's going to be more swings on a week in, week out basis of I think Calvin Ridley will be pretty consistent in this offense. He's going to be, I think, a top 15 wide receiver this year, at least just with how he's looked in camp so far in the preseason. I think what's going to be frustrating is okay, is it going to be a Evan Ingram week or is it going to be a Christian Kirk week? Is it going to be a Tank Bigsby week or is it going to be a Travis Etienne week? I think that's where the frustration comes in. I think that they're all relevant players. I think any one of the guys that we've talked about, top to bottom, you can put in a lineup and feel comfortable at a minimum in your flex spot, or if you run multiple flex spots, I think you're good in that format as well. So yeah, I think Jacksonville. I was doing one of those, make your pick throughout the entire NFL season, and I think I had Jacksonville when I got to the playoffs. They were my number 3 seed in the AFC, behind Kansas City and Buffalo. So I like this team a lot. I think they're going to be a fun team to watch. I think they're going to put up a lot more points than people expect. I think they're going to blow out teams more than people expect, primarily because they do play Houston, Tennessee, um, in Indianapolis twice a year. I mean, I think that they're gonna potentially sweep their division this year. I think at a minimum they go 4-2, but I think they could easily go 6-0 in their division this year. So
The only other thing I'm going to add is target Trevor Lawrence in your drafts. I think he's a very good value compared to where he's going.
mhm.
He's going fairly late, and I think he's going to put up. I have him as my QB6, but I think he's going to be closer to QB5 on there than he is going to be QB10. I think he's a guy that is going to give you great value compared to where he's drafting. We talk about don't take QBs early. I think he's a QB that you can wait a little later on and get and be pleasantly surprised with his output.
Yeah, right now Trevor Lawrence's consensus ADP is 55th overall in standard leagues, and he's the quarterback 8. Which means you're getting him in a 12-man league. You're getting him in, the 4th or 5th round, which I'd feel pretty good getting him there because I think you're going to have the run on the Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen. Those 3 are going to be gone. And you might get lucky. I think Trevor Lawrence, he definitely will slip in a lot of drafts to where you could probably nab him in the 7th or 8th round, and you can pad, additional guys like Calvin Ridley, and be able to get that stack early on. So yeah, he's a guy that I wouldn't necessarily compare to Patrick Mahomes, but if there's a discounted guy that I would want to put in that bracket, it would definitely be Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, all right, that does it for this episode. We're getting close. I mean, we're September 4th. We're 3 days away from NFL football, right? September 7th. It's here, man. I'm excited. Make sure to check us out on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Spotify, and Apple Music, where we can catch all of our podcasts. Next week we'll be wrapping up the NFC North and AFC West. Or no, I'm sorry, we already talked about that. We'll be wrapping up the AFC North and the AFC West. We'll be talking Ravens, Bengals, uh, Steelers. I don't even know, Kevin. We've talked so much football the last week that it's kind of a blur. I'm just ready for the season to start. So thanks.
Anybody you haven't heard us talk about, we'll get to them.
We'll probably talk
We'll
about
get
it
to
again.
them.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us tonight. We'll tune in next time.